Welcome to Distinctly Well. I'm your host, Leo Tonkin. And in each episode, we engage in insightful and distinct conversations with a variety of experts, innovators, thought leaders, and friends, exploring what it truly means to live and be well in all facets of life. Let's explore, learn, and grow together. Welcome to Distinctly Well. Hi, everybody. I'm Leo Tonkin, and this is another episode of Distinctly Well. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Danielle Posa is somebody I met actually through some interactions with the Global Wellness Institute at first. And then my passion over the years in being in corporate culture and leadership, and Danielle's work at the Gallup Corporation and being a well-being advisor, and start really looking at what it is to be well-being or wellness in the corporate environment and organizations. There's a lot of work going on in there. I know Danielle's worked with Deepak Chopra and have developed some programs, and she's got some exciting ventures that we'll be talking about. But I want to welcome Danielle to Distinctly Well. We've met a few times. She's here locally. She's also a cancer survivor. And she's here in Palm Beach, and we've had the fortunate opportunity to get face to face, and look forward to having this conversation with you. Welcome.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
No, it's pretty cool. And, I guess one of the things that first was a trigger of reaching out to you was on a call that, you were sharing some things about well-being in the workforce. And that's really kind of what I want to have this conversation be about. There's a lot of talk out there about what is corporate wellness, what are some initiatives, what are they doing, and kind of want to get your purview. I know you've worked with some of the large companies, and obviously Gallup is one of the more respected companies that really is in that space, along with others. And just looking at, you got wellness, you got well-being. It could be many contexts inside of a business environment. So I'm curious as to how do you define and distinguish that whole part of the business?
Distinctly. Let's
Yeah.
distinctly define it.
Yeah.
So for the first distinction that I usually always make is the difference between wellness and well-being, because historically wellness has just had just much more of this an association more so with physical health and wellness, or as somebody who lived in New York City for a while, it was kind of like wellness was more so reserved for, more the elite groups who were going to yoga all the time and, drinking a lot of green juice. And so
Right.
wellness kind of has a little more of that, vibe to it. And well-being, I always go back to the definition that kind of started and stemmed from Gallup, which was just, a quality, just a high quality of life, a high quality, a life that you really feel is worthwhile, worth living. And so my work is all about workplace well-being, not workplace wellness, because it's really about, empowering people and having people feel truly and deeply satisfied with their lives. And that also means that once you get into defining well-being, there's often a crossover also with happiness, because when you talk about well-being around the world and measuring well-being, there's a lot of stuff about happiness. So another distinction to make is that well-being is not happiness. Happiness
Right.
is a fleeting emotion. And so you have to kind of take, when you're really studying, measuring and wanting to increase well-being, especially in a workplace, it's both a combination of, the short term, the day-to-day emotions, along with
Sure.
long-term, how people feel about their lives.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of distinguishing about well-being. It's more of the whole person. I know for so long, the conversation in organization is this whole phenomenon of work-life balance, that you have a work life and then you have this personal life, and, they really don't intersect well, but at the same time, it's all who you are.
Yeah.
And, throughout the day, your mind is going, your little voice in your head, your life, the things that you deal with. And I'm curious, the pandemic had, I think, really impacted the workforce in many ways. And one of them, a lot of organizations now have a lot of flexible schedules or are doing things with remote workers. And curious though, when a company really, when you're looking at it, and as you know, a lot of companies have corporate wellness, they'll call a program so they can check the box off saying that they have a program.
Right.
And you have that group, and then you have those that really take it on. What is it like when you're taking it on as part of the culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think first of all, it's not seen as a program at all. It's more just the
Mm,
way that you operate as a business, which often is really comes from leadership and what the leadership philosophy is, and I'm talking like really at the CEO and C-suite level, not
yeah,
just kind of, just in the HR department or whatever. And as you know from your past, like consulting work and stuff, it's really being a people-centered business and just realizing that all the real potential of an organization comes from like unleashing the potential of every individual person. And how do you
yeah,
do that? You do that by making sure that they feel energized, that they have, not just good physical health, but they truly love their work, that they're truly engaged in their work, that they're not, burning the candle at both ends, that they're not getting
right,
burnt out. They are getting some balance, that there is as much as, yes, there's work life integration. At the same time, you do like need balance too, right? You need to be able to end your day at a certain time. So the organizations that really are doing it right are the ones that are saying, how do we make well-being a part of the entire culture? How do we look at our entire, employee life cycle and
yeah,
take into account, what people want in their lives and in their role as they're being onboarded, right? And in terms of how they're being developed and trained, how our leadership is behaving and how they're kind of trained to operate. So it's like when you look at all
yeah.
these different pieces that make up an organization, are you asking how do we make well-being come to life in all the aspects of our business? And I would say most of the clients that I've worked with over the past few years now they just have that mentality to start. They just say, hey, like, we believe in this. We know that this is kind of the secret to sustainable performance.
Yep.
And they're just willing to keep evolving in many different ways. So that's
Yeah.
very different than just like saying, hey, we're gonna have a better EAP this year. We're gonna,
Right.
offer, massage and better perks and, personal wellness or mental health days. Those things are nice, but that's not the same as truly having the mentality of making it part of your culture.
I think it's a big challenge, as when you can create a certain atmosphere. Culture is what many of us refer to is kind of the soul and heartbeat of an organization. And people, I've always shared that people want to feel like they belong to something. People want to feel valued, that what they do makes a difference, that they can contribute.
Mhm.
We are social creatures, and the whole phenomenon about how, we have our work life, and then we have this like other, we compartmentalize it. But it seems to me that it's all blended now,
Mhm.
where to your point, you don't burn candles at both ends. But, for myself as a CEO, there may be things later in the night that I have a thought about or I need to do something. And,
Yeah.
do I shut it all down? And, how much work do you have to really be a grinder out there? And then just by being well yourself as a leader, I know we can focus on the whole workforce, but it seems that a leader and the management and senior leadership really need to be taking on their personal well-being.
Mhm.
And somehow there's like an integrity issue with that,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you have leaders that may say things, but are we doing the right things?
Yeah.
And first of all, what are the right things?
Yeah.
What,
Yeah.
so how do you start? What is it that you start looking at impacting that in an organization? Obviously you got to get a temperature of where they're at, but
Mhm.
how do you cause that to happen?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, I always think that, you know, the first place to start is making sure that there is the proper buy-in from enough leaders across the top of the organization. And so, and that buy-in, hopefully doesn't have to just come from the business case or the research that
Right.
shows, but it's partially like a dialogue, and really having it be something where everybody says, okay, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, that if we focus on well-being, if we measure it properly, if we put the right things in place, this is a really good business strategy. And it's like behind closed doors, what everybody wants anyway. If you read the reports,
Right.
Deloitte came out with a great article, I don't know if it was last year, but about like the C-suite's role in well-being. But what it finds is that during the Great Recession, you had a lot of leaders leaving positions because they wanted well-being and balance in their own lives, and they
Yeah.
wanted a sense of what it was like to see their kids at home and to realize what they were missing, right? And so it's like it's something that everybody really wants. I mean, who doesn't want to like just have a better life and feel better physically and the research shows that leaders who prioritize and make it a matter of their integrity, like you said, which I love. I always say that well-being is a matter of integrity. It's not a
Mm.
nice to have, and it's not even a need to have. Everybody say it's literally a matter of your integrity as a leader, that you have a role, you are influencing people's lives either in a negative or a positive way, and it's up to you and how you are influencing those lives under you. And so one of the ways to do that is to really lead by example and not be afraid to show that you are not working around the clock, right? And that you are prioritizing your own family. The research shows that leaders who do that, their employees trust them more because they
Yeah.
see them as humans. And they know that, oh, okay, if my manager, my CEO is showing that they are prioritizing their well being, that means I can too. And that means that, like, I feel better about the place that I work. I trust the place that I work. I trust that they have my best interests at heart. So it always
Yeah.
has to start there. But so yeah, creating that buy-in, like, more specifically, I've historically almost always done some type of business presentation for the executive team to have them really understand the research, and so that they can
Sure.
kind of come at it first from a business perspective, but then also come at it from the human perspective of like, hey, people are quite literally, dying from stress, whether that's slowly or abruptly. And you have to come
Yeah.
to terms with that and realize that it's getting pretty scary out there from a mental health perspective and physical one. So you have to like take responsibility for that.
It is. It kind of puts, the culture over the years I've seen where I appreciate what you say about the trust factor. Back in the day with Stephen Covey, we used to talk about you're either making a deposit or a withdrawal with people, right?
Yeah, I
And
love
the
that.
more deposits you make, the healthier your bank account balance is with
Yeah.
people. And I do know that there are companies that kind of do things and say they have, diversity, they have a wellness program and stuff, but it's kind of like it lives separately, other than more than a place to come from, as you said. And I think that also opens up that leaders and people in the workforce need to be more, I don't know, empathic with each other. We need to understand people's lives, get it more at the human level. It's just not like you have an employee. It's like this is a life,
Yes.
and
Well,
they
and
have their life to deal with, like you have your life to deal with. You
yeah,
know?
exactly. And I actually prefer to use the word curious over like empathetic, because
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, like, I don't know, you've got your hardcore old school leaders who are just like the idea of just being an empathetic leader, their eyes glaze over when you say it. But
Right.
the thing is, like, if you're curious about people and
Yep.
you start to realize like what they're great at, and you ask questions about what work-life balance means to them, what is their life like at home, how do they want to grow and develop, like what gives them sense of purpose, right? Like when
Yep.
you come from a place of curiosity, not just empathy, like we have to allow for
Yep.
all, but like real curiosity, like that's where you find all these like golden nuggets about people, and you learn how to leverage your employees in ways that benefit them and the organization. So I just like feel like there's this lack of genuine curiosity about who
Yeah.
people are, what they want, what their lives are like, and that's easier also for managers like at lower levels, like to just be it's easier for them to be curious than like maybe if you don't have a natural inclination to be like empathetic, but you can learn to ask better questions,
Right.
right? And just hear more about
It,
what's going on. So
yeah. Well, yeah, that curiosity is great. It's like, it's like an inquiry about certain things. It
yes,
also creates a different level of intimacy.
yeah.
It's about being vulnerable, and it's about, sharing things in a different way where you can create a safe environment for that.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people go through things and they don't want to show that there's aspects of their life that are not well. I
Right.
know that you've been creating some models lately with a lot of the background that you have. There's certain areas at Gallup, I remember you sharing with me, where there's these certain domains, if you
Yeah.
will, that comprise that. So when you look at that, what are those areas that you're touching to kind of create that circle of wellness or well-being, excuse
Yeah,
me?
yeah. Well, we're trying to actually, some of the work that I'm doing now, trying to evolve that a bit because the research really continues on these areas of like really what are these kind of categories that you have to latch on to in order to really have the highest of well-being. But so historically, the five areas that Gallup kind of latched around when they first did the research was your career well-being, and these are in order of importance, by the way, but your career well-being, your social well-being, then your financial, then physical and community. And that there, but it's not so much the categories because we've all heard that, we've all seen Wheels of Life and all the different, but these
Models. Yeah.
five, yeah. So these five, that it's the distinctions behind those five, right? Like it's like, so in order to thrive, in order to have high well-being in your career category, it's things like being able to use your strengths, having a great relationship with your boss, having a sense of purpose, not working too many hours, right? Like there's a certain
Right.
criteria to really thrive in that area. Same with social, same with financial, physical, and community. So those are the five, but now there's a lot of research being done by Gallup and Harvard about really now looking at, which I feel like you really appreciate, is like really taking into consideration like character and spirituality and stuff. And I found this fascinating
Mhm.
because one of the things that I've noticed, because I do a lot of work like with coaching individuals as well, like all different levels, and like
Right.
and what I found is that such a key to well-being is like really knowing yourself, is like really feeling grounded, in who you are and what you want and what your own purpose is and what you're good at and all of that. And some of that work comes with getting in connecting with a deeper part of yourself, having a sense of a spiritual component, so it's not just all in your mind all the
Right.
time, getting more connected like with who you are. And I do feel like that's such a big thing that's missing, and why we're in such a mental health, crisis,
Right.
is we're operating all in this like mental headspace all the time of like doing, figuring things out, thinking things, and not kind of like settling down and feeling more connected, with ourselves, feeling more present,
Right.
with people, with what we're
It,
doing and stuff. And so it's like this missing domain in a sense that now more and more research is like coming out to support.
as you know, over the years, that's kind of one of the things I kind of deal with, and it's interesting because when you're engaged in a project, or you're engaged in doing this work, with either coaching or training and developing programs, it's as if you are having to create new habits. You're really creating a new mindset. I know I wake up in the morning and I have to kind of go through my own mental, okay, what am I up to today? What difference does it make? Creating that context,
Hmm.
you know, um, it's not easy to sustain that. You're bombarded with information and emails, and
Yeah.
you got things happening and people, and it's like, how do you maintain that? How do you not be reactive?
Mm-hmm.
I think we become more of a reactive people. And I know you mentioned about empathy, but I don't think people really listen well. I think people listen to respond and to reply and to rebuttal and it's like, how do we get that sense? And I've been with organizations that have achieved very high levels of operating as a group, and human beings behave very interesting in different environments, right? We have our Facebook group, we have these group, we have our social group, to your point, we have our family, and you have kids and you have spouses and you've got life, and work is part of that. And so how do you maintain that attitude, which is, I think, the most important things. We haven't been trained in that.
Right. Yeah.
We were trained to go to school, work hard as we can, and then retire. But we're living longer. Self-care and well-being and wellness is top of mind. McKinsey just came out with a report, about, the global wellness market and some of the surveys that they have. And, why are people looking at being well? For a long time, it's how we look. If you look good, the fitness and was a big part of it. But the bigger part was interesting now. It's really about their health. It's about how do we take better care of ourselves, being more aware, and so on and so forth. So I think it's interesting for the organizations that get involved because, to your point, you have to give the business case. And when you start looking at the numbers, when I was doing work, you get to the CFO and you talk about programs and they're like, culture, we don't need to do that, right? But then when you start looking at measures, and getting into it, there's a real ROI.
Mm-hmm. And back when I was at Gallup was when the first global well-being research came out, which was from them. I mean, Gallup really is the first to kind of put well-being on the map from the kind of, level that they were doing it in terms of, measuring it and doing all this research. And then the idea of I remember when they first published the economics of well-being. I mean, then it was there was a few kind of key stats. And to me, it was revolutionary. It was oh my God, this is so great. If we can actually, start showing everybody, hey, it's it makes sense to focus on living your best life instead of, I mean, it's cliche, rather than it just being all monetarily driven. Finally, there was science to back that up. Now, there's so much more research. I have a deck I've been working on that's the business case for well-being that is about 100 slides because I'm also, I'm just such a nerd with all the science on this stuff. But my point is that once I started kind of aggregating all of these stats and stuff, it's I had all these different sections, why it's so important to focus on mental health, why leaders need to focus on it, what the returns on, investment, what happens if you're not focused on well-being, how bad is it for the organization? And what about if you are and you're doing it well? What are all the positive gains, right, that you can get from it? So now the business case is to me,
it's there.
Crazy if you're not doing this stuff, right? It's so commonsensical in a way that if this isn't a priority for your business in today's world, when people are really struggling, it just makes no one should have to be convinced on
you would think you just want to naturally care for the people that work for you, care for each other, Well, and there are some organizations that are doing it right. Right here in our own backyard, you got the Breakers Hotel where Denise and some of the folks that
2 days ago. Yeah.
They really take it on. And, we did a project. It's funny. We did a salt room for the Waldorf Astoria at the Biltmore in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's this really cool outdoor structure that's a salt therapy. And they were having their employees being able to get salted, being able to get the benefits of some of the modalities that they have. And, you start educating people and you're providing resources and, people are not just the leaders taking on their own well-being, but you have your staff and individuals wanting to be healthier and them understanding what's in it for themselves.
Yeah.
So it's not just what's in it for the business. You got to present the case, you know, so that there's the buy-in. It's not just a top-down approach, but I would say, yeah, it can happen from the bottom up and inside out and
Yeah.
outside in. And
Yeah.
I think so. What are the challenges then? If it makes sense, if it's like this is a no-brainer, then what's the
Why is
resistance? Where's the challenge coming from?
Yeah. Well, the biggest I think is that most organizations still aren't measuring it properly or don't know how to measure it. So then, as a
Mm-hmm.
result, if you can't, really see the, see the benefits, and you're not tracking it properly, then it's not, it's like the term like that. It's like we're this network of conversations, right? So like conversations often form around measurements, and if you're not measuring something and you're not measuring it
Right.
properly, then you don't believe in that metric enough, right? And then the conversations change. If there's no measurement around well-being, that's not what managers are talking about. The CEO isn't at the state of company like address. The CEO isn't
Right.
saying, by the way, our well-being score dipped by 4 points this year. What happened? Like, what are the team, like what teams need more support? Where do we need, like, so starting with a really reliable measurement is the foundation for everything, I think.
Just because some people will be curious. I mean, are there specific measures? Are you like measuring attendance? Are you measuring absenteeism? Are you measuring, like, when you go to measure that, is it just surveys of people giving their feedback about certain things? Obviously,
Yeah.
that's valuable. We used to say, take some of those surveys literally, but don't take them literally.
Yeah.
Um,
So so it's a combination. So in an ideal situation, and this is part of what we're trying to
develop.
work on, as you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I don't really feel like, I mean, I've worked with a lot of, like, I don't know if there's anybody that really has like the holy grail of doing it, but like, for example, so the ideal situation is that you integrate both the survey tools and measurements along with other data within your organization. But I would say, you don't necessarily want to lean too much on one or the other. Both kind of
Right.
help tell the whole story. But if I had to choose between the two, I would lean on the survey data, as long as you're asking the right questions.
Right.
So most people probably have heard of like Gallup's Q12, which is considered, one of the best, kind of questionnaires for measuring employee engagement, that has been proven time and time again to,
Right.
lead to, positive business outcomes. But when you're measuring well-being, I usually put into three categories, so that regardless of the survey tool that you're using, you can kind of modify it as long as you're hitting the, certain areas. But there's a whole science behind,
Yeah.
asking
Yep.
questions, and the amount that you can ask them and how often you ask them and all that. But to me, the key areas are, you always have to be measuring employee engagement, because how people are actually feeling about their job plays a huge role in their overall well-being. So you have to have foundational engagement metrics in place. The second is the culture of well-being, meaning, like, so yeah, you've got how they're doing at work, and then you've got their individual well-being and asking them questions about the other areas of your life. But then in the middle of that is the role that the workplace that they are in is playing. So how often do they feel burnt out? Do they feel that the
Right.
leaders are demonstrating certain behaviors, that the leadership and the company cares about their well-being? So you've got to be asking questions about the workplace itself and the impact that workplace is having on people's well-being. And then you always need to measure, like, what I call end result well-being. So always asking them about the other areas of their life. Those 5 categories that I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
mental and their mental and emotional health. So you want to have questions on those too, so that, okay, like, at the end of the day, if we look at just their overall life, how are they doing, and what's the score on that? But it's got to, like, produce a score too. You can't just, like,
Yep.
as a bunch of open-ended questions and have it. So it's about the exact questions that you're asking, how many questions you're asking, how
Right.
often you're asking them, and then are you filling in the rest of the picture with other data on the organization. But it's still fairly archaic, like that's why we are trying to, come up with kind of new ways of measurement so that we're not just relying on,
Right.
survey,
Yes.
which,
Well, it is. I always have, in my consulting and culture change, obviously you got to maintain the conversations. Conversations disappear. So if you don't keep the conversation alive on
Mhm.
well-being, and to your point earlier, if they're not talking about
That
it,
was the phrase I meant to say was conversations disappear. Yeah.
yeah, and how do you, it's like messaging. You got your outbound messaging of who you are as a brand, as an identity. But how do you do that with your staff? How do you really create that so it's something tangible that they can hold on to? And to your point, yeah, you need benchmarks and you need, some ways of measuring the integrity of the surveys. And as you collect data from other organizations, you kind of get a sense of that, I know.
Hmm.
But it is all about elevating the way that they're operating.
Hmm.
There's a lot of companies that are, doing some of the right things. They do care. Here I am to a degree in the wellness industry, and I work with people that are in the med spas and fitness clubs, and you do all this work, and it is kind of like, well, do you walk the talk?
Yeah.
Are you doing things? And as you know, as a cancer survivor and myself, we've been through things, and you got to do certain things. Obviously, knowing what I should do and then actually doing it, and maintaining it. That's where I think the challenge is for a lot of people. Well, what do
Sure.
you do? What do you do to live and be and work well? You're a mom. You got kids. You got the projects going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for one, the balance aspect. I mean, I do think that, you know, the like actual balance is really important. I mean, I know everyone's all about the whole like integration thing, but balance in terms of I'm pretty strict about the amount of hours that I work, and because my kids are little, like two, are they're 2 and 5, and so to me I don't like ever I don't ever like believe in like sacrificing time with them, and I don't want to be like, in a situation where I'm just like waking up, seeing them briefly in the morning, and then putting them to bed at night. So like one of the things that I do is I usually start my day at 9:30 and I finish at 4:30. So I have like some time like with my son and my kids in the morning and like get to
Yep.
see them. I really believe in the concept of like bookending your day, like you said before, like, the conscious practices or something in the morning where you're like reminding yourself you're in control of your life. Like before kids, I used to do a lot more meditation
Yeah.
in the morning.
Right.
I'm like starting to get back into it because I believe in it like wholeheartedly. It's just like my morning
Yeah.
routine is a little different these days, but
Right.
it's still the same concept of like bookending your day with those things that you chose. Because when you feel like you're defaulting into your day, like you're at the mercy of your emails, that you're at the mercy of your boss, that you're at the like, then it just sets you up for like, oh, I'm not in control of my life.
Right.
Somebody else is. But if I'm like, oh, I wake up and I get to, have breakfast like with my kids, and I do make time for some other things, like I said, less so meditation and some other things instead. But again, it's just that, kind of saying I'm going to choose how I begin my day and then ending it too. Like I'm, pretty good at like disconnecting. And I'm somebody who, like you said about the integration factor, mine is very integrated because I love my work so much. So I do like think about when I am reading, it's usually like happiness and well-being books, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so it is integrated, and I do love it. And I could do it all day long if I wanted to, but
Sure.
you still need to cut
You
it off. Even if you do love your work, like you
right.
still can't make that your excuse for not, kind of finding balance in other
Right.
things and disconnect properly.
We got to rewire my brain sometimes. It's like you got to train the brain.
Yeah.
Especially like somebody who has ADD as a kid, and then my mind at the end of the day, I'm not working, and then my mind is just
Focus.
what's that?
Yeah, you seem like a pretty focused person. I wouldn't have thought
You
you're.
Well, you need some discipline about some of this, right? You do need to develop some new habits. And I will say, as you get older, at least I'm finding as I'm aging, you know, there's other, health things pop up and, things that you have to deal with. And, the relationships you have. And, my mom is a healthy 84, but it's like, you start thinking about things. I have grandkids. So you have your young kids, and my grandkids are in that age group and everything.
Yeah.
And you start looking at, what matters most to me? What's most important? And how do I keep that in front of me? And keep the connection between the work that I'm doing and how that is fulfilling. And, you got to keep that up in front of you.
And you got to keep exactly that before you're older in life.
Yeah, right.
That's the problem, is that everyone feels like, they
Right.
don't start asking those questions until later. But this is where the role of the workplace comes in, because a lot of people who are younger, and you're proving yourself and you feel like, oh, this isn't really what I want, but I have to do it because it's like, I mean, yes, there's those elements of like, putting your best foot forward and working hard when you're younger and all of
Right.
that stuff. But just asking the questions, just asking those questions that you said.
What-
It's like what's important to you first and foremost. Like a lot of people just don't even know the answers to those questions because they haven't asked themselves it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. What do people value? What are they really concerned for in life? What matters to them? And when you can match that with an organization, their values, not something that you put up on a wall, but something that you really can sense in that organization is, I think, one of the ways that you can tell how well an organization is being.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's an interesting phenomenon because, to your point, the way that, at least growing up when I was in the workforce, you wanted to show up to work before your boss did, and you wanted to leave after he did or she did. And, the harder you worked, the thought you were going to get, more up on the ladder and do things. And so a lot of some of the perspectives that we have in our organizations are a little bit archaic. And now you've got multi-generations. You mentioned younger folks. Some of them I know, it's just a job to them now that they're not interested in all these other things in career hopping or growing, but they're finding themselves. And then you got the aging workforce, and what wisdom do they have that have more of a voice rather than kind of fading out into the wind? And you've got a lot of these different aspects going on now. It's a very interesting topic. So what do you see is happening for the future? What's emerging? What's next in this space?
Oh, well, I mean, the big buzzword AI, right? I mean, we were talking about it a lot yesterday, Tim and I personally was harping on the fact that I feel like we're kind of headed for this like mayhem with it in the workforce, because I feel like, people are going to be expected to know how to use AI, and then if you're expected to know how to use it, then that means that more might actually get put on your plate, right? Like, so it's like, for example, if you're a marketing director and you're expected to take care of like social media and email campaigns and things like that, but you can pump those out now with an AI bot who can help you write things. Now, all of a sudden there's this like pressure to go faster, to do more, to so like, and so I feel like there's this, what's the right word? There's this, I don't know, is existential crisis the right term, of kind of like, who are we as human? Like, what makes us human, which plays such a huge role in well-being, because the essence of well-being is feeling like you said, you're contributing, that you're able to kind of, use the best of yourself, that you're able to use your strengths, that you're using your energy properly, all that stuff. And AI is like going to just create like this whole like turbulence and production and being being productive, the whole and the expectations associated with it. So I think that that it's going to be even more important that you are really closely monitoring the well-being of your people and having them feel truly valued, because the doubts that came in the past of like, am I doing a good enough job? Does my manager approve of me? Am I going to get fired? Now those concerns, I think, are going to be on overdrive, because now you have another like threat, which
Right.
is right. So now psychologically, I think people are going to be like of that mindset. I don't know. What do you think? Do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, yeah, I think people talk about AI. Not that many people really have implemented it in a way that you can train staff. I think some
No,
are.
not
I know.
yet. I think
Yeah,
they
not
will.
yet. I mean, I use it. I've been using it for some of my writing, and it gives me a base. And there's aspects of it that streamline business. I will say. Do I need to have a copywriter? Can I write something, and by being the right kind of person who can prompt AI and know how to use it as a tool in all the various aspects. It's kind of like new technology. There's stuff happening,
Yeah.
and how quickly can we adapt? And there's going to be more stuff happening. You know, I remember when FedEx first got established, where you can send something overnight and they'd get it at 10:30 in the morning, right? And then you had the fax machine. I don't even remember when I used a fax machine last. I
I
don't
know.
even have a landline. Everything is in my cell phone. The technology of where it's going. You've got companies putting out goggles now, so you don't even need to have a screen interface. It's just going to
Yeah, scares
follow
me.
your eyeball and your finger motions, and you're able to manage everything in front of you. So it's exciting to see what's going to happen over the years in technology. And I think, to your point, it can be a threat. It could be a useful tool. It is something we have to integrate in the overarching sense, because I think it could be used to working well and being well, and contributing to the way that I get work done.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, how do you navigate through all that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just answering your question in terms of kind of what I think is going to be one of the biggest things that kind of
Yeah,
do my area of workplace well-being, like I
right.
that be just a major,
That's like the major thing getting ready to bump up against us.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. Well, Daniel, I really appreciate you taking some time out. A lot of good conversations. I know we can go on and on in
Yeah.
distinguishing this, because it's
Yeah.
great, because it is about the conversations. How often do you talk to people? And I love the inquiry. I'm curious when I get with certain executives, and I, I, I propose, thought provoking questions, that can lead to some kind of inquiry. And sometimes you get the deer in the headlight kind of look.
Have you asked them any good
I,
well-being
I
questions
I
lately?
do. I kind of get to it, when I get to talk about, when some folks know that I'm in the wellness industry, and I start asking about what is it that you do to live and be well. Forget about how are you doing. I ask people, how are you being?
Yeah.
And we are so much of a human doer that we forget the being part of who we are.
Yeah.
And when we can focus on that being well, and what does well-being mean, it's an
Mhm.
interesting conversation to have with people.
Yeah. Well, and I know we have to go, but I'll just because
Yeah.
you mentioned the breakers, and I'll do a shout out to for Denise, because I was having dinner with her the other night, and we were at one of the breakers restaurants, and and she always, the employees always come by and say hello to her, and she's been there for, I think she's like 35 years or
30.
something.
Yeah, I know. Great.
And one of the employees stopped by, and he said, he was saying how he had been there for 22 years. And I said, well, what has kept you here? And he
Mhm.
goes, he's like, well, there's really two things. And let me see if I remember both of them. So it was like, one was that was that when he made a mistake, like how it was handled, that he had made like he's in the food and beverage side of the
Mhm.
business. He made a mistake that was like pretty significant from, like, I guess, a business, like something. But he said the way that they handled and reacted to the mistake like, hey, it's not that big of a deal, it's, it's okay, and we're human, and that's like that was like one of the biggest things. And then the second part, sorry, the dog probably has to
Mm.
go out if you can hear
Yeah.
him. But the second thing which I loved was that he's a gay man, and he called himself flamboyant, which he actually didn't even seem, like that much to me. But he goes, as you can tell, I'm somebody who's a big personality, and I could be pretty flamboyant and da. He's like, but they never have once told me to like tone that down. And if
Right.
anything, they like, I've always been told to embrace that it's part of it. And to me, that sums up so much of what happens, because that's like, when, depending on how leaders be with you and all those micro moments and those
Yeah.
exchanges, and they're saying that this is a matter of like who are you, and leveraging people for exactly who they are and putting them in the roles where being flamboyant is a great thing to be,
Right.
And so, but it's that idea of like, when people have to feel like they're constantly toning themselves down in an organization, eventually you're like, you get smaller and smaller and
Yeah.
smaller. And then that's why people leave, because it's like, I am
Yeah.
not myself anymore. I've lost who I am. I'm not appreciated. And that's kind of, well-being, like at its core.
Yeah. I like to look at that as, people being authentic of who they are. When you can just be who you are, as you're saying, and it's authentic, it's real. It's not some act. It's not some role you're playing. It's you get an opportunity to express who
Yeah.
you are in a way that contributes, and
Yeah.
people will know you that way. Is it- but no, that's part of it. I love when I get to do these podcasts and we integrate life, and it's our interruptions
Yeah,
and all.
speaking of bringing our whole selves to the conversation, but yeah, that's exactly
Very cool.
it.
Well, again, I appreciate you taking time out and being on Distinctly Well. There's a lot of neat stuff going on about that, and people will be able to find out more about what you do and some of the projects and some of the businesses you have. I know you've got, a lot of stuff that you've done, some programs that you've done with Deepak. You've got your well-being hacker, which is another personality of who you are, and, things that are out there, and got some new ventures coming out as well. So we look forward to seeing that. And I look forward to being able to work with you. As you know, while I wear the hat in my wellness space, my passion is making a difference in this area as well. And I guess that's one of the whys of Distinctly Well. I have my distinction business and I have my wellness business. And this gives me an opportunity to have these kind of conversations. So I really appreciate you joining.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I just appreciate your work so much, in the way that you really kind of peel back the layers of the onion to really get to the heart of like what makes things, real and come to life. And I appreciate you taking such an interest in this subject, because I think it's pretty important. So
Very cool. All right, everybody, make sure you check out down below a little bit more. And that's it for this episode of Distinctly Well. Thanks for joining us in this episode of Distinctly Well. For all the show notes and resources mentioned in this episode, head over to distinctlywell.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show to never miss an episode, and check out the video version of each episode over on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, live distinctly, live well.